Confused about sweetener safety? Here's everything you need to know. Last month, the World Health Organization, WHO, announced that its cancer research agency, the IARC, had classified aspartame as a possible human carcinogen while simultaneously reporting that its Food Additives Committee, JECFA, had confirmed it is safe to still consume up to 40 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day of aspartame. JECFA has reviewed aspartame safety 3 times and IARC only once. And before we go any further, I will just apologise. I know that aspartame and aspartame are different ways to pronounce it, but I'm going to go with the way that I know. That's my Aussie accent for you. Before the IARC report was released, WHO issued new dietary guidelines recommending that people should not use non-nutritive sweeteners like aspartame to control body weight or reduce the risk of non-communicable diseases such as heart disease or diabetes. The WHO says the evidence suggests that the long-term consumption of non-nutritive sweeteners does not help people to lose weight, and it may cause undesirable outcomes like an increased risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. So, is aspartame safe or not? Well, as usual, it depends. A consumer advocacy group says the conflicting information coming from the WHO is partly the result of conflicts of interest for people in the Food Additives Committee. More on that later. What are non-nutritive sweeteners? Non-nutritive sweeteners are compounds that have an intensely sweet taste with no or very few calories compared to white sugar. They are 300 to 13,000 times sweeter than sucrose, that's ordinary sugar. They include both artificial sweeteners and sweeteners derived from natural sources such as plants. Common artificial sweeteners are saccharin, aspartame, sucralose, neotame, acesulfame K, allantoin, and cyclamate. The most common natural non-nutritive sweeteners are monk fruit extract, which is also known as swingle fruit extract or luhanguo, and that is derived from the fruit of a vine native to southern China, the Ceratia grosvenorii. And the other one is stevia or steviol glycosides, which are derived from the leaves of the plant Stevia rebaudiana, or by biotechnological methods using genetically modified microorganisms. Sugar alcohols, polyols, are not considered non-nutritive sweeteners because they have some calories and they're less sweet than both artificial sweeteners and regular sugar. So why eat food with non-nutritive sweeteners? The accepted wisdom for choosing to eat foods containing non-nutritive sweeteners is that they're a good way to reduce sugar and calorie consumption without sacrificing taste. Fun facts about the discovery of non-nutritive sweeteners. Don't try this at home, kids. Bad lab practices were responsible for the discovery of both aspartame and cyclamate. Aspartame was discovered when a chemist making a synthetic peptide for use in the study of developmental gastric ulcer drugs accidentally contaminated his own hand with an intermediate chemical without realizing it. When he licked his hand later, he discovered its intensely sweet flavor. And the inventor of cyclamate told the New York Times he brushed his lips after working in the chemistry lab without washing his hands and found his fingers tasted sweet. He then tasted every chemical he had worked on that day to find the compound that had the sweet taste. And I've included, as always, a source in the email and post, but another less reliable source claims he discovered the sweet taste after smoking a cigarette that had been resting on his lab bench. There are just so many things wrong about all of this. Which sweeteners have safety concerns? Many artificial sweeteners have been the subject of safety controversies. For example, cyclamate was widely used in the United States in the 1950s and 60s, gaining GRAS or GRAS status, which is generally recognised as safe, before being abruptly banned in 1970 due to cancer fears after a rodent study. It was similarly banned in other countries, with many bans later overturned when other studies failed to replicate the results. Saccharin, discovered in 1879, is the oldest artificial sweetener and was considered GRAS for 2 decades before being linked to bladder cancer in the 70s. The US FDA attempted to ban it in 1977, but was thwarted by, and I'm quoting here, avid consumer protests. The bladder cancer link was later shown to be specific to rodent physiology. After cyclamate, which is allowed in more than 50 countries but banned in the USA, aspartame is perhaps the most controversial non-nutritive sweetener. Aspartame was first approved as a sugar replacement in 1981 and is used in a variety of foods and medications. It's generally considered to be safe when consumed occasionally and in small amounts, except for people with phenylketonuria, a rare genetic disorder which can be, and those people can be seriously harmed by consuming even small quantities. Aspartame has been the subject of much food safety-related research since the 2000s. In 2007, researchers demonstrated an increase in certain cancers in rats that were fed doses approximately similar to the US acceptable daily intake of aspartame over long periods. At around the same time, it was linked to migraines in some individuals. Many other studies have followed since, and these were reviewed by both the IARC and JEFCA for the recently published WHO report on the health impacts of aspartame, which is, of course, linked in the post and the email. So, do non-nutritive sweeteners work? Since most people in wealthy countries eat too much sugar, for example, Americans consume more than double the amount recommended by the US FDA and 4 times the amount recommended by the World Health Organization, and whose food and the World Health Organization's Food Additives Committee, JEFCA, says that non-nutritive sweeteners are safe in moderation, there must be benefits to using them, right? Well, actually, there's not much evidence that they work. They've been linked to weight gain, in fact. For example, a long-term study of 3,682 adults in the 1980s found that people who drank artificially sweetened beverages put on weight over the course of the 7 to 8 year study period compared to people who didn't. In fact, those people who consumed more than 21 artificially sweetened beverages per week almost doubled their risk of becoming overweight or obese compared to non-users. Saccharin intake was similarly linked to weight gain over 8 years in a study of 31,940 women in the 1970s. More recently, a 2022 study showed that glycemic response is impaired in healthy people who consume sucralose and saccharin, possibly because of its impacts on the gut microbiome, and more on that in a minute. Interestingly, when obese patients in a metabolic ward were given sugar-containing foods and beverages in place of aspartame-containing equivalents without their knowledge, the patients immediately ate less, achieving a 25% reduction in their total energy intake. In another study, people who'd been fed non-nutritive sweeteners, especially aspartame, were more motivated to eat more foods than those who were not. Rats showed the same effects with saccharin pre-feeding before a normal meal. Yet another study showed that people who consumed diets that are at least once per day had a 36% greater risk of experiencing certain aspects of metabolic syndrome, that's overweight essentially, and a 67% greater risk of type 2 diabetes compared to people who were otherwise similar but who did not drink them. And just a note from me here that it doesn't prove that the diet soda caused the diseases. I've got a graph in the email and the post which shows that as the number of new products in the USA containing artificial sweeteners is increased, so new product launches, I guess, the BMI, the body mass index of the population, increases at the same time. So, do non-nutritive sweeteners cause heart disease? In a 2022 study of 100,000 adults in France showed a link between artificial sweeteners and heart disease and stroke. Participants in the study who consumed large amounts of aspartame had a higher risk of stroke than people who didn't consume the sweetener. Consumers of sucralose and acesulfame potassium had a higher risk of heart disease. As above, this isn't proof of causation, but just demonstrates a link. Non-nutritive sweeteners and the gut microbiome. With advances in technology and our understanding of the human microbiome, scientists have recently turned their attention to the effects of non-nutritive sweeteners on microorganisms in the human gut. In one such study, people who consumed 6 sachets of artificial sweeteners per day, which is within the US FDA's acceptable intake of either aspartame, saccharin, stevia, or sucralose, experienced measurable changes to their gut microbiomes after 2 weeks. People in the control group who did not consume the non-nutritive sweeteners did not have changes. The changes observed for people who had been given daily doses of sucralose and saccharin impacted their body's ability to handle glucose. When gut microbiome samples from affected people were transferred to mice, those mice also experienced blood sugar alterations. Other studies show different effects on human gut microbiomes, with a review of recent research concluding. Collectively, these studies suggest that not only is the gut microbiome affected by the consumption of non-nutritive sweeteners, but that these impacts on the gut microbiome have physiological consequences for the host. And I'm quoting there. And when they say the host, they mean the person. Controversies due to commercial conflicts. The conflict between the WHO's agencies, with the IARC saying aspartame is a possible carcinogen, the WHO Nutrition Committee saying that non-nutritive sweeteners should be avoided, and the Food Additives Committee, JEFCA, saying aspartame is fine to consume at levels up to 9 to 14 cans of soda per day, has been attributed to commercial pressures from industry by advocacy group US Right to Know. According to the group, around half of the JEFCA expert panel that made the decision to maintain the status quo for aspartame, including the panel's chair and vice chair, have ties to an organisation called ILSI, International Life Sciences Institute. ILSI is an industry-funded charity, and it's previously been accused of promoting its agenda to regulatory authorities with the aim of shaping international policy and law. US Right to Know says ILSI is a front for big companies such as Coca-Cola that have a vested interest in shaping decisions about food additives. Aspartame is the sweetener in Diet Coke, the world's most popular Diet Cola. Or, in fact, the most popular diet soda. So, what to do with this information? As a food company employee, there are technical benefits to formulating foods with non-nutritive sweeteners. However, consumers' health may not benefit from foods containing non-nutritive sweeteners. Consumer perceptions of the safety of sweeteners such as aspartame could negatively impact their desire to buy such foods. And a final thought for food company employees is the regulatory status of aspartame seems safe for now. But, of course, that might change. As a consumer, the purported benefits of consuming non-nutritive sweeteners are poorly supported by scientific evidence. Rather than contributing to weight loss and protecting glucose response in people with type 2 diabetes, they may actually have the opposite effects. However, it's not a good idea to replace foods containing non-nutritive sweeteners with foods with high sugar foods. So the World Health Organization recommends that consumers avoid non-nutritive sweeteners and also reduce the sweetness of their overall diet, consuming food with naturally occurring sugars like fruit and unsweetened food and beverages instead of food with free or added sugars. In short, conflicting reports on the safety of aspartame, a non-nutritive sweetener, have been released by agencies in the World Health Organization. Artificial non-nutritive sweeteners have been linked to negative health outcomes in animal studies and human studies over many decades. New research has shown that non-nutritive sweeteners consumption alters human gut microbiomes. Consuming non-nutritive sweeteners containing foods can lead to weight gain. There have been suggestions that panel members of the WHO agency, which claims consumption of aspartame is safe, have a conflict of interest because of their association with an industry-funded charity. And there are links to learn more and links to the WHO actual evaluation paper as well in the email and the post.